Good morning, and welcome to the August DAC Monthly Webcast. I'm Jennifer Stafford, the Division Director in the Division of Assessment Support. With me today are Michael Hackworth, Program Manager in our division, as well as Kevin O'Hare, a consultant, and Pam Powers, our Systems IT consultant. And Pam will be taking questions throughout the broadcast, so if you have questions, please email dacinfo@education.ky.gov. First, I'd like to begin with welcoming each of you back to school. Many school districts have started or will start within the next couple weeks. And the beginning of a school year is like the dawning of a new day. It is rewarding and it has lots of infinite possibilities. I hope each of you all had the opportunity to relax this summer and your summer was full of adventures as well as good health that you deserve. The opportunity for us to begin a new school year with a lot of hope and a vision and excitement for the new school year. Each one of us has the opportunity to do great things for our children in Kentucky. I wish each of you the very best as you welcome back the 450,000 students for their educational journey in the 2018-19 school year. With that, we'll start with the agenda for today's DAC webcast. First, we'll start off with alternate assessment updates, then move into reporting science performance levels, which will happen this month. Michael's going to talk with us about some current events happening as well as other upcoming events. And as always, we'll take your questions and answers. So, Kevin, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Well, thanks, Jennifer. So it's August 9th, and several school districts across the state are already in session. So for those, I know you're having to get up a lot earlier than those that are not yet. So, you know, if you know a neighboring district that's still not in school and you're friends with a teacher there, they're probably going to rub it in that they're going to sleep till 8:30 in the morning and you're already back at work. But I want to share out some information to everybody, not just those that are already in session, but those that will be coming back in a few days around alternate assessment and some of the updates that we're going to be focusing on. The old adage says no news is good news, and so we don't have a lot of news. So you can put that on your radar of good or bad, but we're going to try to keep it as simple as possible. The first thing we're going to talk about, though, is the changes for 2018 and 19. The changes were minimal, but they were impactful changes. So we want to first look at those, talk about those, and then we'll move into most of the things that you're probably already familiar with to some degree. The first thing is that dimensions A and B are no longer going to be identified as part of the alternate K-Prep assessment. The identification of the dimensions has always been tied to communication barriers for students looking for a symbolic mode of communication. Now all communication can be identified as part of the IEP process. So when that initial evaluation is being conducted and after the referral has been made and they are determining the student placement in the least restrictive environment, another thing they're going to be talking about is that communication status. During this past year, we, as a state, looked at the Kentucky alternate assessment participation guidelines, and the advisory group felt that communication is something that should be focused on from day one. And they talked about the importance of establishing a mode of communication well before instruction can occur. And so with that, the goal is to make that come to life as early as, some students being identified as early as age 3. And so when that occurs, communication needs to be on the forefront of that development. We, as a department and as a as an office, our goal is to see those students progressing well beyond starting in the third grade. So that is a look at a couple of changes. Something else you're going to see this year is that there's no longer going to be 4 answer choices for the attainment task. So for this year, in reading, mathematics, writing, science, and social studies at the elementary and middle, for social studies, you're now going to see answers A, B, and C. Now, in years past, that removal of one of the answer options has been tied to students formerly known as Dimension B students. Well, now we're going to actually apply that to all students. So instead of having 4 answer options, they're going to have now just have 3. And one of the biggest changes for this year that we have been working on internally and are wanting to share out with you is that based on revisions made to Senate Bill 1 in 2017, there was a requirement that asked, or a mandate stating that a college entrance exam must be administered at grades 10 and 11. As you're familiar, that also applies to the alternate. We have to align completely per assessment requirements with all students. So with that being said, this year the transition attainment record, or the Thar as you're familiar with, will be required at grades 10 and 11 beginning in September. So we'll have additional information coming out within the next month and a half regarding the transition attainment record when that training is made available, and it will apply to both grades 10 and 11. So here we're looking at just information that the majority that have worked with alternate in the past are familiar with. We have remained in alignment with students in the general assessment and the content areas required per grade range. So this just looks at the elementary requirements. Here you'll see middle school requirements for grades 6, 7, and 8, and it's based upon the breakdown for what we look at as a middle school configuration, an elementary configuration, and a high school configuration. So you may have a school that may be a K-5 or a 7-12. Yours may be a little bit different, but you're just going to apply the content areas where they need to be. And then last but not least is for high school. And of course you'll see now that as we noted, the 10th grade now will have an alternate for the academic readiness component. I think we're going to talk just a little bit briefly about that, but we're still working on a college entrance exam or an assessment in that area. So whatever is selected, the transition attainment record will then align to that selection. And then you'll notice at grade 12, once again, we will not be assessing social studies until we have a set of standards in place, and working with the high school and the U.S. history components until everything is in place. We will continue to not assess social studies at the 12th grade. Here's a look at the assessment trainings. If you received the Monday DAC email that was sent out this past week from Jenny Larkins, there was a link to the alternate K-Prep assessment calendar for this year, and there it focused on the dates as well as the time frames for materials and all of those great things that come with the preparation for the assessment and the administration for the entire year. But the first thing you need to think about, whether you're a DAC, a BAC, or a classroom teacher, if you have test administrators in your building, whether it be on the alternate, whether it be for any type of state assessment, they must receive the administration code training, and we recommend everybody to receive the inclusion of special populations training as well. So if you're administering, you have to receive the administration code. If you're working with students that may be receiving accommodations, whether you be the proctor or whatever your role is, you also would need to be included in the inclusion of special population trainings. That typically occurs within the district, and in doing so, I'm sure that as DAC or back in the building, you have already made arrangements for that training to be administered. The overview attainment test training, which it will be released on August 27th, that is for teachers that's required annually. Basically, it's just a recall of information for administration purposes. One thing I can share that'll be a little bit different this year is that around the same time materials start arriving in the district, and that's scheduled to occur October 22nd that week. A couple of folks from our contractor with the University of Kentucky will be doing a live webcast to talk about the administration. This is the first time we're going to do that. We're going to look at some possible ways to modify those materials, and we'll do a live chat. So that I'm kind of excited about that coming up, and I begged and pleaded, and they were in agreement to do so. So that's something that we're going to work on in the horizon. And then, of course, the last training being the transition attainment record training. It's scheduled still to open up on September 24th, and that training and administration actually opens the same day and will run throughout the entire year. So that'll actually is set to end on May the 24th of 2019. So testing windows established for first window 1 and then looking at window 2. The first testing window will open on November 5th, and it'll run through December 14th. So we're trying to remain as close as possible to what we've been doing as far as time frames go, looking at about a 5.5 to 6 week window for administration, and that gets us toward the end of the semester, to the first semester. And then the second testing window is scheduled to open on April 15th, and it'll actually run through the May the 25th. And actually, I want to point out that's an error on my part. That should be May the 24th. So I will admit to my mistakes. I messed up there, and that should be May the 24th. And it does show May the 24th on your calendar that was sent out this past week. So my apologies for that. All right, materials. We noted just a few minutes ago about materials coming to the district for window 1, which will be our focus right now. We're anticipating that release of materials to come the week of October 22nd through the 26th. Typically, the materials will arrive 1 to 2 weeks prior to the beginning of the testing window, and so we want to try to remain in line with that. We do recommend that if your teacher has completed their online quiz for the attainment task, that they have access to these materials. Now, they've completed their code of ethics, signed their non-disclosures, all that is in place, so the security part has already been, should have already been discussed at this point. But they're the ones that are going to be working on a daily basis with the students, and dealing with a group of students that maybe, even though they're low in numbers, are very diverse across the spectrum of the entire program. There's no way at the department we could make all the adaptations needed to their materials. So we encourage the teachers to have access, hands-on these materials, to make those necessary changes before the testing window begins. The online training system, basically that's still what we like to call the hub for the teachers and the DACs and the BACs, anyone who will be involved with the alternate assessment process. The entire system as a whole will remain the alternate assessment systems homepage, but the online training system, basically for the actual alternate K-Prep side of things, is where that the teachers will go for first-time access. All the district administrators who are involved in the process will go in. As a DAC or a BAC with access, with DAC level access, you can track your teachers to see when, if they've completed their quizzes, at what point. We do ask that registration be completed from one year to the next, and the reason for that being that there's a lot of turnover, unfortunately, with our teachers. I want to let me rephrase that. We do see a lot of teachers moving from year to year. A lot of them retire, and if they get to retire, we're happy for them. But if we lose them, it's always sad to lose good teachers. But that helps us to be able to track those teachers, to see who is active in the system, so that we're not moving through and placing students or placing teachers in the system that don't need to be there. So as we have done in years past, the username will continue to be the district email address. That is the only address that we will recognize, is your district email address. So if you come in with a Yahoo or a Hotmail account, it's not going to be accepted. And then your password will be, for first-time access, will be ABC123, all lowercase. And we do encourage you to update that password after the first time you go into the system. So, as noted, those are things that haven't changed. The student registration database will continue to house student scores from the attainment task, as well as any student that is expected to take the transition attainment record. We'll continue to share information as we progress into the year. Of course, that database will not be available until November 5th, the first day of the fall testing window. But as we have in the past, we'll release a manual specific to the student registration database, as well as how to register or how to activate teachers in the system for the DAC and district level administrators. And then last but definitely not least, this is that calendar that I talked about early on. As noted, Jenny Larkins in this past week's Monday DAC email shared a link to this calendar on our alternate K-Prep webpage. It can be found under resources, just to be exact, if you want to go out and print you a version off. And looking at that test window 2 and Thar administration closing, that is the correct date, May the 24th. So I will make sure and get that corrected, but this is where it needs to be correct at, and it is. So that concludes my part with the alternate. I guess now we'll go to Pam and see if there's any questions we could address.
Yes, Kevin, we've had a couple of questions come in.
Okay.
It helps if I turn on my mic and then you can hear me. This seems to be our day for oops today. So let's start with your first question, Kevin. Will the proficiency scores for high school come from the attainment task or the Thar?
That's a good question, and a question that we can answer. We have discussed, and the proficiency scores for high school will actually come from the attainment task. The process being a former end-of-course assessment that was in place, moving to a summative, we actually never went the route of an end-of-course assessment for alternate. We stayed the course with summative assessments, and in doing so, actually, we accidentally moved to where we needed to be a little early. So we actually have a summative assessment in place for high school, and so your proficiency scores will come from the attainment task and not the Thar.
Okay, our next question is, will the ESAR and the CWEC be required for grade 12?
That is a question that it will be. It will be part of accountability this year. It will be optional. Of course, as we move into the transition readiness components, that will be more so addressed through the Office of Career and Technical Education. Helen Jones will be that contact person. But we will be asking grade 12 students to complete that process, and hopefully as those students move into grade 14, those transition years, they will be able to reach a lot of the requirements through the employability skills attainment record and the career work experience certification. So as a whole, yes, it will be required this year.
And one last question. They seem to like your live webcast. Will the live webcast, the chat you were talking about earlier concerning administration, be recorded?
Absolutely, absolutely. As long as our great friends Andy and Megan will allow us to do so, we will definitely bring that webcast to you live, but it will be recorded as well. So we will share it out hopefully through a Monday DAC email as well as an alternate assessment email. So yeah, we will definitely make that recorded. And one thing I do want to share out, Jennifer, if it's okay, is a lot of districts have experienced some changes to their web addresses. And Pam, you know more than I do about this, but they have moved to a Google a Drive or Google account for their email addresses, and that has had a tremendous impact on the alternate assessment email listserv. So if you're not getting the email, you need to let me know. I'm getting some kickbacks, and so I'm going to have to go in and manually re-enter a lot of those email addresses. So if something happens in the next couple weeks that you're not getting information from me or your teachers are not, let me know so that I can make sure and get that corrected as soon as possible.
Well, thank you, Kevin, very much for your information today. It sounds like we've got a few changes, not a lot of changes, but they're significant in the fact that it is going to affect our students and the assessments that they take. So one additional point on the attainment task as in a and how it's being used for proficiency in the Thar. One way that I think about the Thar is the equivalent of the college readiness assessment. So currently it's the ACT. So if you think about the Thar and how it's used and how ACT is currently being used, you can make that connection between how the ACT is used and how the Thar is used. So that's a good way to think about it and to explain it to your teachers, especially your high school teachers and administrators. So let's talk about now the science, performance, and reporting. We received a letter from the U.S. Department of Education and their conditions that they have put on our Title I funds. Now, if you were a district assessment coordinator in the 2017-18 school year, you may recall that we had conditions on our Title I funds during that year. We laughingly said to Kevin, who is sitting here with me, that the conditions at that time was that we had to provide assessment results on the alternate assessment, and we had to make those public. We did that last year during the 2017 fall reporting. Similar, the U.S. Department of Education came with a letter to KDE having similar requirements for our Title I funds, but this time it was on all of our assessments. So in the letter, one of the conditions on our Title I funds from USED is that we had to have for the 17-18 school year a fully operational general science assessment administered at elementary, middle, and high school levels. Further, we must submit to the U.S. Department of Education evidence that we have publicly reported those science student performance levels. And we must do that by August 31st. So we have some conditions on our Title I funds. Now, as a state, we do rely on Title I funding a good bit. So we are intentionally going to meet these requirements for this public reporting of science performance levels. So for elementary and middle school levels, we will use the operational science assessment given at grades 4 and 7. And then at high school, because we field tested in 2018, we do not have performance levels for the end of course assessments that we were field testing. The operational assessment that we did have at high school was the ACT, so we will report science ACT subscores to meet this requirement from U.S. Department of Education. So currently we are developing the cut scores. We had standard setters in July, and we had a follow-up meeting with the science standard setters, and we've talked about that multiple times on this broadcast, how those teachers came in and set the performance levels for novice, apprentice, proficient, and distinguished on 4 and 7 this past summer. So we had to have that meeting and those standards set before we are able to present publicly. So those meetings have occurred. We had some follow-up with the members of that committee, and Pearson, our current vendor, is working through those performance levels now with the student data. So we have not received those scores yet from science for grades 4 and 7, but we will have those scores prior to this deadline. So the science for ACT, though, we have had those cut scores for the ACT science. Now, you may ask, well, we haven't seen science subscores or cut points for science on the ACT. However, back in 2011-12 school year, we had a standard setting that was on the end of course assessment. Because the end of course assessment that we've been using since 2011-12 was Quality Core, those assessments were aligned to the college readiness standards of the ACT. So when we brought together educators from around the state back in 2012, they first had to set standards on the ACT in order to correlate performance levels on the Quality Core end of course. So buried in a technical report, we have had science cut scores in science for the ACT because we use those to determine the performance levels for the Quality Core end of course. These now are being utilized to meet this condition on our Title I funds from the U.S. Department of Education. These, again, are for reporting purposes only. So the science cut scores that you see here, novice, apprentice, proficient, and distinguished in science, will be used for reporting purposes only to meet that federal requirement. Now, let's think about the timeline here. We've got to have these science performance levels publicly reported by August 31st. However, we have not received those from Pearson yet. So when Pearson sends the individual student performance levels for science from Pearson to KDE, we will review and then provide those performance levels to our district assessment coordinators. We are going to put those out to our district assessment coordinators through the secure web application through spreadsheets at that time so that you can review those summary reports. During that review, we will ask you to look at your summary data to see if the numbers seem reasonable. For example, if we say that your students that tested in science at grade 11 was 30 students and you have 300 students in your school, we need to know that if that was not caught. So we are going to ask our district assessment coordinators somewhere in the mid to late August time frame to look at the performance levels in science before we do post those publicly. Now, we will communicate when that is, as soon as we get those scores from Pearson, and then we are able to turn that back around. This review will be have a quick turnaround because we do have to meet that August 31st deadline. When we do send out the performance levels for science, we will update the spreadsheets, and all content areas will be available for your review. So again, that will happen in mid to late August through the secure web application and spreadsheets, and we will give you further directions at that time for that quick review. By August 31st, we must post the science performance levels for schools, districts, as well as the state in our open house. And it's very similar to the posting that we had for alternate assessment last year to meet the conditions on the Title I funds. So again, this is public reporting and will be used to meet the guidelines of our friends at USED.
Jennifer, before you move on, when we talked about the science scores from ACT being incorporated, we actually, for alternate, had a full-blown operational test this year.
Yes.
So we set standards for alternate this past summer. So those scores will come from the attainment tests that we administered this past year.
Great. Thank you very much.
Just for clarity purposes.
Great. And as well, for clarity, we are using not accountable students, but for this public reporting, it will be tested students. So that's a little bit of difference too. And again, this is just to meet those federal requirements. Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm going to turn it now to Michael Hackworth, and he's going to talk with us about what's happening now as well as some upcoming events.
Okay, well, good morning, everyone. As Jennifer just said, the last few slides of our DAC webcast today are focused on current and upcoming events. And the first event that you all are all aware of right now is the Fall Data Review. Fall Data Review opened yesterday, and it goes through August the 14th. Now, we did a little bit of research this morning, and as of today, in August, 133 districts have logged into SDRR. And in those districts, that includes 334 schools. With it beginning these numbers in August, it does include the cohort review. We have had 574 change requests for data review at this time. So we have people in there working, which is a good thing. And we encourage you to keep up that work. And if you are not one of those districts that have been working in SDRR, please take some time to get in and work on your data. Now, one of the things that I do really want to stress is the importance of this process for fall data review. Please remember that this is one last chance for schools and districts to request change in individual student accountability, request non-participation for students who weren't assessed, and verify demographics before public reporting. Now, we will have a QC day in September, but that is the focus of that day is just large systematic changes. So again, this data review in the fall is your one last chance to request any changes for accountability, demographics, and things like that. Detailed instructions on the fall data review were talked about and described in our July 25th monthly DAC webcast. We invited Chris Williams to be part of our team that day, and she walked through the process of fall data review. So if you need a good resource, that DAC webcast has been recorded, and you have access to that so that you can go back through and look at what is required for fall data review. In addition, this past Monday in our Monday DAC email, there were more detailed instructions on what should be completed for this review. Next, I would like to talk about upcoming events. All of these dates that I go through are tentative, so please note that. But we have said earlier that in early August, there will be the release of student performance levels in Pearson Access Next. And this release will include everything except for science. On August the 22nd, we have around 15 people coming in from various roles throughout the state. to do our accountability standard setting. Now, this work will focus on the identification of CSI and TSI and determining the cut scores, of what schools would be classified as comprehensive support and improvement, and what schools may be targeted support and improvement. So that is a really important day that's coming up. In late August, possibly early September, we plan to release science student performance levels, and again, those will be released in Pearson Access Next. September 5th, we have a special KBE meeting, and this will be to discuss the results from the accountability standard setting. The commissioner will take the proposed cuts to the board, and there will be further discussion on those. Then on September 13th, we announced this date in our July 25th webcast. That is our planned Quality Control Day. Remember that Quality Control Day is focused on large systematic changes. And then in late September, there will be the public release of CSI, TSI, and other schools. Now, if you are classified as one of those schools, you will receive notice from someone at the department that you will you are classified as one of those before it becomes public. So your superintendent will probably get a call if you receive that identification. So at this time, we will pause, and I'm going to look over to Pam to see if there are any questions over anything we have gone over today, and we will be happy to try to answer those.
Thanks, Michael. Well, let's start with the first question for Jennifer. They want a little clarification one more time on this. The ACT science subscores for reporting purposes only, not for accountability?
That's correct. The ACT subscores will be used for public reporting only. And again, the U.S. Department of Education has sent us a condition letter. They have placed requirements on our Title I funds, and we must provide evidence that we meet those requirements. So the ACT, those subscores, we will present those publicly, as well as the operational assessments from grade 4 and 7, and as Kevin mentioned, the alternate assessment attainment task.
And this next question concerns our data review. Does it matter if a student's free and reduced lunch status changed during the testing window in May? Is there a set date that we need to pull our documentation to record this in SDRR?
So we would ask you to look back at the your testing window and to see what the student was during that time. So those individual demographic changes can be made in SDRR. Previously in the spring roster review, we had requirements to go into Infinite Campus to make any student demographic changes. However, during this fall data review, the individual changes can be made within the SDRR application itself. So if you need to make changes and you have questions, please email the KDE Data Assessment mailbox as well, and then you can make those changes within the SDRR application itself.
And we have another one that has come in. When will the student reports be available in Pearson Access Next? And we know it's not science.
Thank you. And that's a really good question. So similar to this quality control process that we have for reporting publicly scores, this quality control process that we're in the middle of started back in the spring with getting our rosters right. Then the next step is our fall data review. Then the next step is our quality control day before we go public. So similar to that process, we have similar quality control processes with our vendors. So we have to make sure that before we provide information, student level or summary level information within the Pearson Access Next or any of our other vendors, the quality is right and the data is accurate. So we are in the middle of this quality control process with our vendor, and we are working back and forth with Pearson on that quality control. So the individual performance levels for our students will be within a Pearson Access Next, with the exception of science, very soon. So as soon as we get finished with that quality control process, we're going to send out several things. You're going to receive a special DAC email that will most likely come from Joy Barr with information on Pearson Access Next, training on how to access the student scores from Pearson Access Next, the non-disclosure form, as well as a document that has the cut scores in it for both the regular assessments as well as our alternate assessment. So it's coming very soon. We just have to finalize those quality control steps.
And that's all the questions that have come in.
Well, we thank you so much for your time and attention today. And if you have questions about SDRR or anything that we have covered today, please email dacinfo@education.ky.gov. And as Michael said, if you have not been into the SDRR to make changes, then we ask you to review your data in there, because again, this is a very critical step for you as we go into public reporting. We wish you the best in your school year. The next time that we will see you is on our next DAC webcast, which is September 13th, and that will be our Quality Control Day. So we will have a different format for that Quality Control Day on the 13th. We will have a presentation early in the morning around 9 o'clock Eastern Time, and then we'll have a follow-up webcast on that day a little bit later in the day to give you any updates on that quality control process. So with that, we wish you the greatest success for this school year, and we hope to see you soon.